We have a really thoughtful and informative evening ahead of us tonight. I want to thank the Brookline League of Women Voters for co-sponsoring this conversation, and a thank you to Brookline Interactive Group for taping tonight's presentation and for live streaming it. I'd also like to mention actually that we have a guest here, new state rep Greg Schwartz, who represents a number of our precincts. So there he is. Thank you for being here. And we're going to have a number of speakers. I'm going to just go over the agenda right now, and then I will introduce everybody before they speak. So once people start speaking, we'll just have a chance to listen to them. So Felina Silver is here of the League of Women Voters. Laura Knott, our coordinator for Brookline Mothers Out Front. We have videotaped remarks from Senator Markey, who is unable to attend today because the Senate is in session in DC. We'll have remarks about the Massachusetts climate bill from Garrett Casey here, who represents our state senator, Cynthia Creem, and then remarks about some legislative work from Jeremy Liskar, who I'll introduce in a minute. Afterwards, discussion amongst participants will follow with questions from the audience. I would ask all of you to write down your questions during this presentation and to pass them to the nearest Mothers Out Front member, who will pass them to me during the discussion period. So I'd like to first introduce Senator Markey, who will be here in video format. He is really a consumer champion and national leader on energy, environmental protection, and telecommunications policy. He has a prolific legislative record on major issues across the policy spectrum. As a member of the Senate Committee on the Environment and Public Works, he serves on the following subcommittees: clean air, climate, and safety, nuclear safety, on fisheries, water, and wildlife, on chemical safety, waste management, environmental justice, and regulatory oversight, and also transportation and infrastructure. You wonder how he can do all these things. Senator Markey is also chair of the Senate Climate Change Task Force, which works to build political momentum in the US Senate on climate action. While serving in the House of Representatives, Markey was the top Democrat on the House Natural Resources Committee and a senior member of the House Energy and Commerce Committee. In February of 2019, Senator Markey partnered with Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez to introduce the Green New Deal, an historic resolution to create millions of good, high-wage jobs in the United States and to counteract systemic injustices, all while addressing the existential challenge we face of climate change. Garrett Casey here to my left is the policy director and counsel at the Massachusetts State Senate, representing here for us State Senator Cynthia Creem. He's a graduate of Bowdoin College and Harvard Law School. He's worked as legislative advisor both in the U.S. House of Representatives and at the Massachusetts State House, where for the past 4 years he's served in the office of Senator Creem. She's as Senate Majority Leader. Senator Creem was unexpectedly called into a Senate session tonight and has asked Garrett to represent her in our discussion. Senator Creem represents Brookline, Newton, and Wellesley in our Massachusetts Senate. In recent legislative sessions, she's served as the Senate Majority Leader and as chair of the Senate Committee on Global Warming and Climate Change. She's used her chairmanship to shape the Senate's climate agenda, convening hearings on topics including the future of the gas system, mass save, electric vehicles, municipal and utility climate resilience, carbon dioxide removal, and embodied carbon emissions. Several policies that grew out of those hearings were included in the Commonwealth's most recent climate laws. Senator Creem is also the lead sponsor of bills related to the transition from gas to clean thermal energy, modernizing the bottled deposit system, increasing the municipal tree canopy, reducing transportation sector emissions, and ensuring equitable access to solar energy and more. We also have Jeremy Liskar with us over here. He's the US Legislative Manager for the Climate Reality Project, which was founded by former Vice President Al Gore. The Climate Reality Project is an international organization with over 100 chapters in the United States and more than 3.5 million supporters. They work to achieve a swift, systemic, and just transition towards net zero emissions by the middle of this century, similar to what Mothers Out Front is doing, with major steps towards that goal by 2030. While studying political science and public policy at George Washington University, Jeremy led a successful fossil fuel divestment campaign and helped significantly advance his university's climate plan. Before joining the Climate Reality Project, Jeremy was very active in the Sunrise Movement, helping elect climate champions and planning direct actions. Felina Silver is a lifelong Brookline resident who is proud to be of Cherokee lineage. She is the president of the League of Women Voters in Brookline, where she's also the program director and is a member of the League of Women Voters Massachusetts Legislative Action Committee as a specialist on racial justice and Indigenous legislation. She also chairs Brookline's Indigenous Peoples Celebration Committee. And finally, last but not least, Laura Knott. She co-leads our Brookline chapter of Mothers Out Front, a very active climate organization. In this role, she develops and hosts a broad range of educational programs and assists members working at the intersections of decreasing biodiversity, increasing environmental pollution, and surging climate change. Laura's a writer and performer. Her work appears in numerous places, including the Georgia Review, Boston Art Review, Duke Magazine, Hinterland, Leonardo, and there's many more. This summer, she'll participate in the Bread Loaf Environmental Writers Conference. She's performed at the Documenta exhibition in Germany, in the California desert, and on public television, among many other venues. She has served as lead curator of the first exhibition on climate change ever shown at the MIT Museum. She was born in Mississippi and has lived in Brookline since 1981. I list all these things because we have a very accomplished set of speakers, and I thought it was important to hear them. So right now we'll spend a few minutes hearing Felina talk a little bit about the League of Women Voters' work in climate change.
Thank you. First, I'd like to thank Mothers Out Front for hosting tonight's event and allowing the Brookline League to co-sponsor. Thank you to Garrett Casey, who is the policymaker for Massachusetts Senator Cynthia Creem, US Senator Ed Markey in a pre-recorded video, as you will see shortly, and Jeremy Liskar, US Legislative Manager for Climate Reality. State and local leagues and individual league members have a critical role to play in helping to limit future climate change and protect the planet. The league calls for prompt action to cut this country's greenhouse gas emissions, invest in a clean energy economy, and help the world's poorest countries tackle the challenge of climate change. The league believes that climate change is a serious threat facing our nation and planet. The league believes that an international approach to combating climate change, including through energy conservation, air pollution controls, building resilience, and promotion of renewable resources, is necessary to protect public health and defend the overall integrity of the global ecosystem. The League supports climate goals and policies that are consistent with the best available climate science, and that will ensure a stable climate system for future generations. Individuals, communities, and governments must continue to address this issue while considering the ramifications of their decisions at all levels: local, state, regional, national, and global.
Thank you very much. Laura?
Thanks, Kathy. We're here tonight to think together with you and among ourselves about how our Commonwealth and our town and other cities and towns in the Commonwealth can respond effectively to recent actions affecting federal climate policy. I'm charged with the unenviable task of laying out a framework for our discussion by noting what some of those recent actions have been, and thereby bumming out, if not everyone in this room, almost everyone in this room. The framework that I'll present tonight is by no means comprehensive. Some items have been or soon will be challenged in court. Full compliance by the administration with court orders is iffy, and other items, especially those concerning personnel and leadership appointments, are so broad that it's not yet clear how their details will play out. So I like to think about what's happening in federal climate policy, not so much as a framework, really, but as a rapidly evolving system, a system that will require state and local governments to move with equal rapidity and agility. So brace yourselves. Here are some of the factoids. In international policy, the administration has canceled $4 billion in pledges to the Green Climate Fund, a United Nations initiative that helps over 100 countries adapt to climate chaos that is already happening. And unsurprisingly, the administration has also initiated withdrawal for the second time from the Paris Climate Accords. In domestic policy, the overarching fact controlling the decisions that are being made is that the administration has declared a, quote, energy emergency. Meanwhile, the United States remains the largest producer of so-called natural gas in the world, as well as the world's largest producer of petroleum. Back to the factoids. A pause has been lifted on the construction of new liquefied natural gas export terminals. 6 facilities are currently under construction at sites around the Gulf of whatever it is called. And another 25 LNG projects are in various stages of planning. An executive order prohibits both leasing federal land for wind power, the largest source of renewable energy in the United States, and directs agencies to deny federal permits for wind power on private land. At the EPA, appointed to the leadership of the Environmental Protection Agency is former Senator Lee Zeldin, who scored 14% on the National Environmental Scorecard sponsored by the League of Conservation Voters. Other appointees to the EPA include a lobbyist for the petrochemical industries, whose job will be to serve as lead regulator for air pollution, also at the EPA. On February 6th, 168 employees of the Office of Environmental Justice were placed on administrative leave. I understand from my reading that their forced administrative leave is only valid for 10 days unless the Office of Environmental Justice is shuttered. At the Department of Transportation, Sean Duffy, the new transportation secretary, has announced plans to weaken fuel economy standards for cars that are powered by internal combustion engines. And simultaneously, the administration has halted funding for a $5 billion program to help states build out their electric vehicle charging networks. At the Department of Agriculture, among other actions, the administration has directed the agency to remove web pages that reference climate change. At the Department of Energy, Chris Wright, the former CEO of Liberty Energy, the second largest fracking company in North America, has been appointed secretary. In 2023, Wright was quoted as saying, "There is no climate crisis, and we're not in the middle of an energy transition either." I won't scare you any more than I already have just now by summarizing all 41 pages of recommendations regarding climate that are included in the Project 2025 report. Some of those recommendations have already been adopted, and we can, I imagine, expect to see more of them. They range from a plan to spend $0 for public transit to the repeal of all energy standards for appliances. I'm a climate organizer. The factoids, the framework, the evolving system that I've sketched out here are all alarming to me, but I'd like to add another factoid or two. We are here tonight. We're here together. Local and state actions matter, and support for them begins in meetings such as this one, where we think together. In the first few days after the 2024 election, I was asked what I was doing to remain calm and keep working, and I realized that I was nowhere near calm and that I really didn't want to be calm, but I was still working anyway. To quote the climate thinker Donna Haraway, who is inscribed on your pencils, I'm staying with the trouble. On behalf of Brookline Mothers Out Front, I thank you for being here tonight, and I thank you for staying with the trouble with us. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our team from the Brookline Interactive Group to screen a special message for tonight's gathering from the Junior Senator from Massachusetts, the Honorable Edward J. Markey.
Hello, everyone. I'm Senator Ed Markey, and I'm sorry that I cannot be with you in person this evening, but it's great to join you. And I want to thank Brookline Mothers Out Front and Brookline League of Women's Owners for organizing this fantastic event. And I'm grateful for the work you do each and every day to engage the community and encourage interest in both the civic process and in the policy we need to tackle the climate crisis, an existential challenge of our time. The events of the last few weeks have shown that we are contending with a direct challenge to the checks and balances of our institutions and to the authority of Congress itself, a challenge unprecedented in the history of our nation. So let me be clear. The current administration isn't governing. They are not delivering for the American people. They are throwing our country into crisis. But we can all stand up and do our part to stand in the way of these dangerous attacks. I'm proud that the Inflation Reduction Act, or as I like to call it, the largest climate bill in the history of the world, and the bipartisan infrastructure law have brought more than $14 billion into Massachusetts since their passage. Unfortunately, the Trump administration wants to freeze and seize the hard-earned federal investments that are being put to work in our cities and our towns as we speak. And these investments include $1.1 billion for Massachusetts to provide safe, reliable drinking water, including work to cut out contaminants like PFAS or replace lead lines. And it's just absolutely critical that we keep that money flowing. So it's also the $156 million for Solar for All, which could cut energy costs by 20%, as 31,000 low-income households in Massachusetts benefit from it. The Inflation Reduction Act also expanded residential and municipal clean technology tax credits, including direct pay provisions. And through direct pay, municipalities, nonprofits, tax-exempt entities can receive cash rebates for clean energy projects like new electric vehicle fleets, heat pumps, power, and we know that we're going to have a fight ahead. I'm ready for it, and I know you're ready for it. We're going to fight in the courtrooms, and we're going to fight on the Senate floor, and we're going to fight in the streets to come out to protest what the Trump administration is proposing. Peaceful protest to call out the unconstitutional cutoff of funds. And we're going to fight every single day in Congress to protect these laws and these programs. And together we'll build a world where people won't just survive, they're going to thrive for generations to come. So thank you for your efforts. Thank you for your passion in standing up for our democracy and for the climate.
Thank you, Senator Markey. We'll talk about this more later, but there is a demonstration this Friday at noon at the State House. At the bandstand on the Common. Thank you. We'll talk more about that later for sure. We're going to go from Senator Markey's comments to Garrett Casey, who will be presenting some thoughts and remarks on behalf of Senator Creem.
Hi, everyone. First of all, Senator Creem just wanted to say she's sorry she couldn't make it here tonight. Usually the Senate meets on Thursdays, so we thought would be safe tonight, but they're debating the Senate and joint rules. So she's probably still there voting right now. But I'm glad that I get to talk about what's happened at the state level. I think after hearing about what's happening at the federal level, my heart rate went up a little bit. But Massachusetts is actually making a lot of progress on climate. In the fall, the legislature passed a pretty sweeping climate law. Many of you were instrumental as activists in making sure that some of the gas system reforms made it into that law. And Senator Creem wanted to pass on her thanks for your help with that as well. So I will go through some of the provisions of the bill. I probably won't get to everything since, it's, more things than we could get to tonight. But Senator Creem was particularly excited about the gas system reforms, something that she's been working on for a long time with Mothers Out Front, with HEAT, with other organizations in Massachusetts. And the basic idea there is that we will not meet our net zero by 2050 goal if we continue to heat millions of homes in Massachusetts with gas. And so the bill sort of started the process of transitioning to clean thermal energy. One of the policies in there is that we redefined what a gas company is in Massachusetts so that now they can sell non-emitting renewable thermal energy. You might have heard of network geothermal. So now that can be sold by a gas company. We're still calling them gas companies, but we probably should call them thermal energy companies now. And the other reforms there were focused on making sure that we're not digging the hole deeper by continuing to expand the gas system. So there's a few provisions. One that says if there's a petition to bring gas to a whole new community, a new territory, the DPU, when considering that, is going to say, well, is this consistent with our climate goals? Are there alternatives that are available? Does this pose a risk of creating a stranded asset? So we're going to build this gas pipeline, and then 10 years from now, we won't need it, and we'll be stuck paying for it. And the hope is that those changes will make it so that we're no longer expanding the gas system into new territories. We also repealed the 2014 law that had the effect of basically requiring the DPU to approve programs to expand the gas system. I think back then people still thought of gas a little bit as like a fuel of the future, and now we think of it as not at all the future. So it was time to get rid of that. And then another big reform was to the GSEP program. So GSEP is a gas pipe replacement program, and it is going to be billions of dollars spent on gas pipe replacement, if not for the reforms in the next couple of decades. But what the bill did is it put a much greater emphasis on repairing pipes so that, they can serve another 10 years until we, switch to clean heat, or retiring those gas pipes and pursuing things like network geothermal or neighborhood scale electrification with heat pumps. So that was a really important victory. I will note that Senator Creem did file another gas system bill, which maybe we'll get into later, but lots of big accomplishments there, but the work is ongoing. Another big area of the recent law was clean energy siting and permitting. The problem that the legislature was trying to address was that if we're going to have millions more EVs on the road, air source heat pumps, induction stoves in every home, we're going to need a lot more electricity and a lot more renewable electricity. So that means that we're going to have to do a lot of building. And the processes for getting things built and sited and permitted were a little too slow to accommodate the scale of change that we needed. And so what the bill did was it sort of created a new, just for clean energy related projects, path for siting and permitting. So bigger projects will go through the State Energy Facility Siting Board. There's a timeline set. I think I want to get this right, 15 months for approval for those projects, and smaller projects will remain with cities and towns. There'll be a streamlined sort of single permit, a master permit issued by cities and towns rather than, 5 or 6 that all have separate processes. And those are expected to be, I think, within 12 months. So the goal there is to get things done more quickly, get things built so that we can electrify and move forward with the transition. There's also in there provisions to protect the environment. So the state is going to come up with site suitability guidelines to help protect natural resources and, ensure that we're not just setting all these projects in places where they're going to have harms to the environment. There's also environmental justice protections in there. So there's going to be like cumulative impact assessments as part of this. So, if there's a particular area of the state that already has a lot of, a truck depot or natural gas plant and pollution from that, the cumulative impact of all those sources is going to be part of the calculation there. On EV charging, the bill also does a lot. So Senator Creem actually had filed a bill creating a right to charge for condominium owners. So that was included. So now a condo association can't place like unreasonable restrictions on someone's right to install an EV charger in their own parking spot within the condo. Also in common areas, it's now easier for condos to build EV chargers. Historic districts, the same kinds of protections, so you can install EV chargers. And then there's also some things in there to make sure that we have enough public charging stations and that they're in working order and accessible to people. There's a similar thing done for solar in historic districts. So a lot of people weren't able to get solar panels on their roofs in historic districts, and there's new language in there to make the historic districts consider the state's climate goals when they evaluate those applications in effort to ensure that they're actually approved. I'll touch on a few other things. Energy storage. So this is like battery storage for renewable electricity. Something that makes it a lot easier to integrate renewable energy into the grid. If you can store it in the middle of the day when there's a lot of solar and then use it in the evening when there's greater demand. And the bill has the state procure 5,000 megawatts of storage by 2030, including long duration storage, and if it becomes commercially available, multi-day storage. And that's going to be a similar process to what we already do for procurement of offshore wind. A few other things, embodied carbon. This is something that Senator Creem also filed legislation on that was included. This is a term that describes the emissions associated with building materials. So, all the emissions that go into producing concrete or steel, transporting it to Massachusetts, and sort of the whole life cycle of those materials. It's actually a huge amount of emissions. I think there's been estimates that it's 11% of emissions in the US are from those. And Senator Creem held a hearing last session about how Massachusetts could lead on embodied carbon. And one of the takeaways was that the state is actually a huge buyer of those materials, concrete and steel. So if the state starts setting goals to build like lower emission, greener materials, then we can sort of move the market forward, help create demand for those greener products and fuel more innovation. There's companies like Sublime Systems, which is Massachusetts-based, that are making emissions-free cement. And if we can help them scale up and other companies like that scale up, then we can make a huge dent in embodied carbon. So the bill is going to have the state come up with a plan for purchasing low carbon, concrete and steel and other materials and get that ball rolling. Just a quick rundown. There's also some things in there to make sure that electric utilities are making investments in making their infrastructure more resilient against the impacts of climate change, more severe storms, rain, flooding, wind, things like that. It has the DPU create a cheaper electric rate for moderate income residents, similar to what we have now for low income residents. I think that's a recognition that there is a lot of concern about energy costs in the state, and if we're not mindful of that, then we're going to lose momentum for political interest in climate policy. So wanting to be mindful of not just low income but moderate income residents as well. And there's more on my list, but maybe I'll leave it at that. So thank you.
Quite a bit. Thank you very much. It's a lot to metabolize. Okay, we're going to move on to Jeremy Liskar about local legislative work.
Yeah, thank you. So I was asked to talk a little bit about what municipalities can do in this moment while we are under full assault in the climate world from the Trump administration. A little bit more about my role at the Climate Reality Project is that I have a hybrid role where I manage our government affairs work primarily with the federal government. I talk to a lot of folks on Capitol Hill, do advocacy there, represent our organization's positions. But I also support our volunteers across the country. We have over 100 chapters around the country, and they're engaged in advocacy work at all levels of government, just like I'm sure many of you are as well. And that's been able to give me a bit of perspective on both what's going on in different places, and also how local efforts are interconnected with federal efforts. So I promised to give some case studies for that as well, and I will. I'm going to give a few broad strategies that I think are probably the most impactful ways for municipalities to continue to engage on climate work under Trump. But first, I want to say the Inflation Reduction Act is still the law of the land. So no reason, well, some reason, but not too many reasons to despair yet. We still have a lot of really great climate policy on the books at the federal level. And we need to take advantage of what's still out there and what programs might have decent staying power. And if anybody wants to talk to me afterwards, or maybe when we get to questions about, which programs I think have a better shot of sticking around, we can definitely do that as well, because it's my day-to-day life. So that's kind of the first broad strategy that's really important for municipalities, is to understand and take advantage of the federal climate programs that are still out there, and especially the programs that we think might stick around. We need to get projects in the pipeline. We're in a climate crisis. I think our era of getting nice commitments to 100% clean energy and net zero emissions, it's been really good, and that's something that Climate Reality has worked on a lot over the past 15, 20 years. But it's time to get projects in the pipeline and shovels in the ground, and making sure that we're actually getting the infrastructure that we need to reduce our emissions. And a lot of that includes financing. We really need to pay for these projects, especially the ones that have a lot of upfront costs. So I want to talk to you about two specific programs within the Inflation Reduction Act that are still the federal law, that I think represent really unique opportunities for municipalities to make an impact. The first one I got scooped on by Senator Markey, but it's direct pay. I'm curious, how many of you have heard of direct pay? All right, a few hands. Yeah, these are my climate organizers. This is really important to understand. I think it's really, one of the most important tools for municipalities to address climate change. Before the IRA, we still had clean energy tax credits at the federal level. They were smaller and kind of all over the place, but they were there. But another key difference from pre-IRA to post-IRA is the introduction of direct pay, or sometimes called elective pay. And that allows entities that are not tax liable to qualify for the clean energy tax credits. Pre-IRA, it was only the private sector, right? Because they pay taxes, so they can write off a tax credit on their taxes. But if you are a nonprofit, or like a church, or if you are a state or local government, you are not eligible for those tax credits. And now that's changed. So we have these huge tax credits in place. that are worth 30 to 70% of the investment into the project, right? You build solar panels, that upfront cost 30 to 70%, depending on, which bonuses you qualify for. The federal government will pay for that. And that goes a really, really long way for making these projects workable. So I think that is really important to understand. And it's really important to press, your municipality on what is their plan to take full advantage of direct pay. There are some good resources out there, including, an organization called Lawyers for Good Government. They've been really great with technical assistance and making sure that those who plan to actually take advantage of direct pay, get the full support, full legal support they need. Because again, these entities, municipalities, states, et cetera, haven't been eligible for these tax credits in the past. They have a lot of the time less experience going through the process with the IRS and making sure that they're filing the paperwork necessary to actually get that money. Another group that has been doing really good work on this that I work with a lot is the Congressional Progressive Caucus Center. And they put out a ton of materials and reports. But one that I was looking at before I came here to get some good examples of municipalities that have taken advantage of direct pay. I stumbled upon an example from right in our neighborhood here, with Cambridge passing a resolution that the municipal government take full advantage of direct pay, including evaluating which existing projects that are being developed, might be eligible for direct pay if you add on certain climate technologies to those projects. So the resolution was passed, and city departments then researched ways to integrate direct pay into their project pipeline. They conducted community outreach to figure out what made sense for everybody. And then they compiled their findings into a full report of all the ways that they could take advantage of that money. So I think that was a really good example of how you can go about figuring out what makes sense for your community. Another group that works on this issue, Local Progress, they work with progressive municipal elected officials around the country on model policies. They put out a case study report on St. Paul, and St. Paul is breaking ground on a project to redevelop a former golf course on the city's east side into a large-scale mixed-use development with 1,000 living wage jobs and 1,000 affordable housing units. The entire development is striving to be net zero thanks to federal funding from the Inflation Reduction Act. In large part, that's direct pay. They were able to get 50% of a geothermal energy system paid for via direct pay. That's a really big deal, and that made that project possible. Now, they also got a second piece of help from a program in the Inflation Reduction Act that I want to talk about. And that's the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. Now, how many people have heard of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund? All right, a bunch of people. Good. So the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund is important because most of that money has already gone out the door. So the Trump administration can't mess with it in a big way. What it is for those who don't know, is a $27 billion pot of money that in some ways was imagined to be a national green bank, but its vision kind of changed over time to deal with political realities, and was obligated to different entities that are then going to leverage that money to bring in more private capital for clean energy projects, particularly in low-income communities. And a lot of that money will also be going to to subgrantees, which I'll name a few types. Green banks, think state green banks, municipal green banks, community development financial institutions, and community development credit unions. Now, these are entities that have deep roots in the community, and that's why they're getting this money, because they can partner with municipalities. They can partner with states. They can partner with the private sector, community groups to finance projects that meet our climate goals, that create good jobs, and that also just are what the community wants. $20 billion of the $27 billion of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund is fully out the door. The other $7 billion, which is in a fund called Solar for All, that money was obligated. So it should be pretty impossible to claw back. That said, the Trump administration has shut down the portal that the recipients are using to access that money. So it's frozen for the time being. But this money is there, and it just got out the door, like at the end of the Biden administration. So we haven't seen its effect on the ground yet. It is just starting to get to these local entities like state green banks, for example. So municipalities have a huge opportunity to become familiar with the entities in their state, in their community that are eligible for this money, and build relationships with them if they don't have them already, so that they can collaborate on financing important emissions reduction projects. For the St. Paul housing project, that geothermal energy system was also made possible via a loan from the Minnesota Climate Innovation Finance Authority, which is their state's green bank. That was created in the past year. It was the first loan that they made, and that loan allowed them to pay for this system upfront before they got the money back from direct pay on the back end after the project was actually built. So these programs really work together, and they're pretty important in that way. Another example, which I think is useful to kind of conceptualize. I know I'm like using, these are like finance programs, and it's kind of complicated, but to kind of conceptualize the impact here, another great case study is from the Connecticut Green Bank, which is the oldest green bank and kind of the most developed in the U.S. I've been working on a case study paper about a program that they run called Solar Map, which is the Solar Marketplace Assistance Program. And what Solar Map does is that they have innovated a public option for power purchase agreements. And we're looking at this specifically in terms of solar on schools. School solar in this country, 80% of it is via power purchase agreements, which means the school is purchasing, the electricity from a third party company usually, which owns the panels. But what the Connecticut Green Bank has done is offered a public option alternative to that. So the Green Bank actually owns the panels, and as a quasi-public entity, they kind of offer a different package than a private solar company might. One is it can be cheaper, right? Like they don't have to have the profit margin, right? So like there's savings there. Another example of how it kind of interplays with direct pay is they had a situation where they made a power purchase agreement with a municipal school district in Connecticut, and then they went back and filed their paperwork for the low income community bonus for direct pay, And that's a 10% bonus on top of the kind of baseline 30%. And what can happen hypothetically is if they get that extra 10% bonus, then they will go back and they will renegotiate the power purchase agreement and pass on all of those savings to the school district or to the municipality. And that wouldn't happen if you were just doing a power purchase agreement with a private company, right? They have no incentive to go back and redo the contract, right? So that's one advantage. Another advantage, which may be even bigger, is that the Green Bank can take on all of the administrative burden of developing a project. A lot of school districts, they don't have experience necessarily, putting out an RFP and evaluating, different companies and their proposals for building solar, or even for just evaluating a building for whether it can handle solar. The Green Bank can take on all of that work and bring their expertise, and also just bring the trust of the public sector with that. And a lot of school districts would much prefer to work with a trusted public sector entity, right? That makes them more likely to even go about adopting solar in the first place. So we met with the facility manager at the town of Manchester in Connecticut. They worked with the Green Bank to do solar on 7 of their 17 schools in 2022. It reduced their energy costs by $100,000 a year. It eliminated their upfront costs. It eliminated their administrative burden of going through the whole thing, and it increased their future ambition. They're now looking to have multiple full net zero schools with support from direct pay, and adopting other clean technologies on top of that they weren't even considering before, like ground source heat pumps, because they saw that it can work. So I think that's a really exciting example and a big reason why green banks are so important. And I know in Massachusetts, the governor designated the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center in the last couple of years as the state's green bank, and there's a focus there on housing. So I think it's a really, really important opportunity for municipalities to take advantage of, is make sure that they have a relationship with their green bank, make sure that they're communicating what types of programs and offerings might be useful for them, and ultimately working together to get shovels in the ground and projects in the pipeline. So broadly, those are two really, really important IRA programs that still exist and should still continue to exist going forward. And then really quickly, I'll just mention another couple broad strategies, but I definitely want to get to everyone's questions here. The second one is to take stock of the barriers to maximizing these clean energy projects and uptake of clean technologies under the current incentive structure, or even a more limited one, assuming that there are some permanent changes to federal climate policy. It was really great to hear that in the state legislature they're working on permitting reform. I think that'll be really key to that. But municipalities have a really big role in that as well, specifically when thinking about building stock. I don't know the specific rules here and how much you guys have already changed them, but I, from hearing from our volunteers around the country, there are a lot of issues with both delays of like installing heat pumps because of permitting issues. There are delays because of workforce issues. There are not enough, qualified contractors to actually install these technologies, and municipalities can play a big role in solving for these barriers. I won't get too much into the permitting side, but on the workforce side, there's a lot that you can do with local institutional partnerships, with like education institutions, right? And making sure that those education institutions have programs to train workers in the areas that you need. Provide certificate programs for students to get trained in these areas. I've been using heat pumps as an example. And just a quick case study here is, Maine has been the leading state in heat pump adoption. And I definitely encourage you all to look up, what they've done, because it's pretty impressive. But a big part of their success was solving for these permitting and workforce issues, and also making really, really easy rebate programs. But they set pretty big goals for adoption of the technology, and then they beat them, and they had to set new goals because they were so successful. So states are important, but local institutional partnerships are really key. I think I'll pause there. I think I've been going for a while, but yeah, happy to answer questions about any of that.
Thank you, Jeremy. That's been really, really interesting. Especially interesting to hear a very specific example of the terminal aspect, what happens when the money gets put out there for the programs, and what happens boots on the ground. So that was a really good example. So thank you. I know, Laura, you would like to start off with some questions, and then we'll.
Want to give the instructions for audience questions first?
Yeah, so at the beginning, I suggested that everyone write down their questions on a card that was at their seat and pass it along to a Mothers Out Front member, who will then pass it to me. I'll be reading out the questions to get the discussion going.
And while we're doing that, I'm going to ask our speakers a couple of questions, and they're a little bit kind of informal questions of kind of taking the temperature. And the first one is to Garrett. You were at the Senate today. You were on the floor, I assume. When the climate bill passed in November, you may remember that it did not pass during the regular session. A special session was called in order to come back and reconsider it. And in that summer period, the Massachusetts legislature took quite a lot of heat from the press and from the public for failing to pass that and other bills. So I listened with great interest to the signing ceremony for that bill that happened. I guess it was in November, December. And one of the speakers at the signing ceremony said, it was definitely after the November election, when the speaker said, well, it's up to the states now. And so my question to you, Garrett, is what's the mood at the legislature on Beacon Hill? Are you feeling, and can you speak for Senator Creem? How are people feeling about the urgency of moving legislation boldly and with speed?
Yeah, I think that I can't speak for the full Senate, but I know that I've heard Senator Creem say over and over again since November that Massachusetts led on climate well before we had the Inflation Reduction Act or the bipartisan infrastructure law. We passed the Global Warming Solutions Act all the way back in 2008. And so we've led in other eras where the federal government was not particularly supportive. And I think Senator Creem's view is that we will continue to do that. We're mandated. Sometimes people say that we have emissions reduction goals, and Senator Creem will say, actually, we have emissions reduction mandates of 50% reduction by 2030 and net zero by 2050, and we still have those. And so we need to put the policies in place to get us there. So I think a sort of defiant optimism maybe is the tone.
I like that. Or as we say in Mothers Out Front, onward. Yeah.
Exactly.
Jeremy, when we were working on getting ready to do this, you and I talked about the IRA and what we expected to happen. So I have another kind of broad, what's the mood question, which is how seriously, are you taking more seriously now the potential that the federal government will exercise its power to prevent the states and municipalities from acting on their own behalf? Are you taking that more seriously now? Are you seeing it as a more serious possibility now than you did the last time we talked about it?
Yeah, yes, I think that they've over the last couple of weeks, like really demonstrated the extent to which they're willing to flout norms and laws. So yes, it is definitely more of a concern now than when we initially talked about it. I think that I don't think that there's like a huge likelihood that they'll be able to restrict a lot of powers of states and municipalities on climate work specifically, beyond like getting in the way of federal funding. But that's kind of the issue, right? Are they willing to leverage federal funding in exchange for other demands, right? Like, are they willing to withhold money from a municipality because they're a sanctuary city, right? Like I think that's a serious question that we're seeing a lot of groups that we work with think about more seriously. So I think I don't think that they're likely to say, we'll stop all funding to a municipality if they like say X about climate change. Like, I think that that's not likely how it will look. I think immigration policy is where they might be willing to get more aggressive. And maybe that's leveraging federal climate funding.
Right.
So we have a number of questions from the audience. One fairly straightforward one is, how can Massachusetts get a green bank?
Massachusetts has a green bank. Yeah, very exciting. Yeah, like I mentioned towards the end there, the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center is designated as the state's green bank in an effort to attract funding from the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. My understanding, and maybe Garrett can speak to it more, is that it's going to be primarily focused on financing housing-related projects and clean technologies and housing. So that's pretty exciting, but I don't know much more than that.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Mass CEC, Mass Housing, a couple of other agencies coming together to think about decarbonizing the housing stock, especially low-income housing, affordable housing, public housing. So yeah, you had it.
Cool.
Okay. On the topic of building, there's a very large commercial development plan for the blocks across from Route 9, the street. And I'm wondering how can we get geothermal for this area? I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about that area in particular, but the most recent climate law does create avenues for municipalities to press for network geothermal installations. I mentioned the GSIP program earlier, but when the gas company says it's going to tear up some streets or replace some pipes, there's now an opportunity for a city or town to say, well, we actually think that street segment would be really ripe for network geothermal, and you're now authorized under this program to spend the funds on network geothermal. And so I think Rep. Schwartz was mentioning earlier that there are folks in Newton who are advocating for a network geothermal project there. I think perhaps through this program, and Senator Creem has some legislation to make it even easier to do that, hopefully. One of them is called the Municipal Voices Bill. And the idea there is to make sure that the gas companies give cities and towns better information sooner about where they're planning to do gas work, so that the cities and towns then have the time to put together a plan and propose alternatives to them. And then also her sort of sweeping gas system bill, the tactical transition to affordable clean thermal energy, which would require that GSEP funding, 100% of that GSEP funding, which is, I think they spent $561 million in 2022, and it's only going up. So it's a lot of money. By 2035, Senator Creem wants all of that money to be spent not on gas pipe replacement, but on network geothermal and pipe repair.
So the pilot programs for network geothermal are still moving forward?
We'll get some bad news recently about one in Lowell, which National Grid decided not to move forward with. But the one in Framingham is it's running. There's, I forgot the exact number, but many buildings in Framingham, homeowners, a public housing complex that are getting their heat from network geothermal, and it's been so successful that other nearby neighbors were clamoring to join. And so they're actually going to expand it, add another loop and bring more people onto the system, which also has the benefit of making the system even more efficient than it already is.
That's awesome. And do we know why the Lowell project was ended?
I think what National Grid said was that the geology of the area was complicated. And so the costs were going to be higher than anticipated. And I think that's one of the reasons why, we do need really careful planning between gas companies and utility companies about where the optimal sites for network geothermal are, so that we can focus on getting it done there, and then in other areas that aren't so suitable for it, we can get air source heat pumps and other things done. And Senator Creem's bill, which I think I see Karen in the crowd, worked closely with on that, also addresses joint gas and electric utility planning so that we can figure out what are the best places for it.
I just want to say one very particular thing about it. It's really local, which is that as a result of this legislation, there's new rulemaking happening in the Department of Public Utilities that is changing how gas utility companies report the work that they're doing under municipal streets to the municipalities. Typically, in the past, the reports have been vague, not necessarily even naming the specific streets that they might be working on in a neighborhood, and the reports have been extremely late. So I asked some members of our local administration last summer, does the town have any possibility of intervening when we know that the gas utilities are replacing a pipe rather than repairing a pipe? And the answer really is that the knowledge was just not available. It was not available to the municipalities in a timely way and in a detailed way, so that the municipalities could even ask questions. The gas utilities are regulated by the state. The municipalities don't really have a lot of power over them, but we're not even able to ask the relevant questions. And that is changing as a result of the passage of this bill, that new rulemaking is happening in the DPU. So it's a multi-stage process, and it's kind of shocking that that's how the system works in a town like Brookline and all other cities and towns in the Commonwealth. But there you have it, and changes incrementally moving forward.
Yeah, we need the information to act on it.
Exactly.
Yeah. There's a number of questions about what would it take in various areas. So I'll start with one. What would it take to get Brookline network geothermal systems? What do we need to do?
Well, I think Brookline is already, moving forward with some. I think the Pierce School across the street is going to have it. So I think Brookline is pretty innovative in that regard already. I think in addition to the information which we just discussed and the financing, well, I guess the financing might be the biggest thing. But I think Senator Creem's hope is that as we keep moving forward with legislation that was just passed into law and more legislation, that network geothermal becomes more and more the norm. So it's not just a demonstration project. It's something that's just the regular course of business for gas companies, and municipalities are so used to receiving the information in a timely manner and engaging with the utility that that's just the new process, the new norm in Massachusetts.
Okay. There's a question, are these efforts around climate issues, encouraging groups of states to work together regionally on legislation for urgent climate issues? Like, so in terms of some of the things that you've talked about, Jeremy, are there groups of states banding together to get some of this work done?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're definitely seeing more regional collaboration, which is good, and like part of the design of the infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act. There's been regional collaboration on certain projects. Maybe this is not the best example, or I won't even give that example. But yes, we are seeing some. There's like a limited amount that states can do together. It's like some of you probably about like regional greenhouse gas like initiatives. Those are still happening and important. But there's also there's a lot of collaboration right now on litigation across states. I'd say like
Mhm.
that's kind of like
That's where it's at.
that's the main area of activity that we're seeing right now. A lot of state attorneys general were are pretty prepared for some of the Trump administration's early actions on climate. So hopefully, I think that is what we'll see a lot of during the next few years.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Another, what would it take? What would it take to get the bottle bill passed? The bottle bill passed.
So for those who don't know, the bottle bill is, a priority of Senator Creem's. This is, the 5-cent deposit on many, but not all of your bottles and cans. The system was created in, I think, 1982. We haven't really updated it since. And so the deposit remains 5 cents, which is worth a lot less than it used to be. And I was not alive, but I'm told that in the 80s, there was not as much bottled water and Gatorades and sports drinks and iced teas on the market. And so those drinks are just not covered at all.
I can confirm that.
yeah.
That's true.
So Senator Creem's bill would make basically any beverage container in the state part of the bottle deposit system, and it would increase the deposit to 10 cents, as well as increasing the handling fees for retailers. And so the projections are that would lead to, I think, 3 billion more containers being redeemed in Massachusetts every year. And you may have heard that the things you recycle don't always get recycled. The good news is that through the container deposit system, they really do, because they're separated and the materials have a higher value. And so they're truly being recycled. The Senate passed it last session. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get it into the conference committee. But I think that there's a lot of momentum for it. There's going to be an environmental bond bill this session. And I think that could be a good vehicle for policies like the bottle bill that have a positive environmental impact. So, we work closely with our House sponsor, Rep. Decker. Rep. Sicolo has also been really interested in this issue and very helpful. So, we definitely need people to organize and contact their legislators and make some noise about it. And the advocates have been great in the past. We just need to do it again. And I think Senator Creem's hopeful that this is the session for it.
Okay, so we can email, phone call, do those things.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Laura, did you want to say?
I just wanted to add one more thing. We had some meetings with public officials about why wouldn't anybody want to pass a bottle bill? And what we were told was that for some people, the bottle bill adding more costs to buying a bottle of water or whatever was considered a tax. And it seems, well, okay, it's an extra 5 cents, but I just want to mark here that the concerns of constituents throughout Massachusetts, not necessarily in Brookline, but in less affluent communities, for what's it going to cost for the bottle bill, but also what's it going to cost for a transition to clean energy are real concerns. And I think it's important for us to remember that those concerns are real in many, many parts of the state and certainly in many, many parts of the country. When I said that the Trump administration had declared an energy emergency, I thought that to mean that they were thinking there were shortages or something, which there certainly are not. But what I've read about that statement is that the energy emergency that they're referring to is a pocketbook issue. It's an issue of how much it costs to fill a tank, and it's an issue of how much it costs to heat or air condition a home. So yes, we are progressing in Massachusetts, and I'm really glad that we are. We are progressing in Brookline, and I'm really glad that we are. But I think that as we continue to organize and as we continue to try to bring these issues effectively to our national leaders, we have to remember that these are issues, these are dinner table issues for lots of people. One of the most encouraging things that happened, I think, recently, to me at least, because I'm always thinking of the world in this way, was that when the 2024 climate bill was signed, the ceremonial signing was held in the Labor Hall. It was held in the hall of the electricians, the IBEW, one of their local labor halls. And the governor is standing there, and behind her there were 20 or so apprentice electricians. The electricians union, of course, being very much in favor of new heat pumps and moving toward electrifying everything. For understandable reasons, not all of the unions are so in favor. But I keep saying this, and I think it's an important position to remember, which is that climate involves everyone, and we will not win, dare I say, unless everyone is involved.
Absolutely. We need you all to be involved. Another question, how will the information about solar for all be publicized to low-income communities and local municipalities?
I mean, I know that Massachusetts has a solar for all plan that they submitted with their application. I can't say that I'm so familiar with it that I could tell you off the top of my head exactly what the plan is, but Jeremy, I don't know if you have more on that.
Yeah, not in the details of the plan, but just, what I said earlier is what I know, which is, that money's been obligated, my understanding. But the recipients still need to access it through a portal that is run by the federal government. And they've shut down the portal for the time being. And so the money's frozen for now. It's not going to stand because that's illegal. You would think, but that's the current status.
Right. So TBD.
Yeah.
Okay. Someone asks, will anything be happening to decrease consumption of materials and energy? And I would take that as an open question for either the state or for Jeremy in terms of his national work.
I think, in terms of materials, I guess, I don't know exactly which materials they meant, but I think the bond bill that I mentioned, there's a lot of folks who are excited about the possibility of putting sort of plastics waste reduction measures into that, including the bottle bill. But also, other bills, Senator Creem's filed bills related to, disposable foodware used at restaurants and trying to cut down on that. There's been bills filed on, plastic bags and all kinds of different plastics. And so I think that that's something that the legislature, I can't predict, but might take up this session. And then in terms of reducing energy usage, the Mass Save program is I think it has its faults, and I've worked with some of the people in this room on developing bills that Senator Cream has filed to reorient Mass Save towards decarbonization. But it is one of the most successful energy efficiency programs in the country. There's a lot of money available in the new plan for heat pumps, including now low and moderate income households can get full funding for removing the barriers to electrification. So in the past, if you had really old wiring or like more extensive upgrades that were needed before you even could electrify, that wasn't always covered. And the new plan is much more generous in that respect.
That's a big change.
Yeah, a really big change. And so I think, that plan will help us reduce energy usage. And Senator Cream will be pushing for her bill to help the program become even stronger. So I think there'll be some opportunities there as well.
And just a quick plug for a warrant article that has been, I believe, filed by Mothers Out Front to increase the strength of the uses of plastics in the town of Brookline. The bill will be coming before the town meeting at our next meeting. So please support it.
Yes, I'll mention that at the end. We have 2 petitions outside. In the meantime, Garrett, can you describe Senator Cream's MVP, her most important bill, and how it would help Brookline?
Yeah, so the MVP bill is, some of you might know the municipal vulnerability. Oh, I see Emily in the back. The Charles River Watershed Association, which Emily leads, is our main partner on this bill. And the idea for the bill came out of comments that Emily made at a hearing that Senator Cream convened a few years ago. So the idea behind the bill is that we have this program in place already, MVP, which provides funding to cities or towns for resilience projects. 2 problems there. One, we don't provide nearly enough money, so there are way more applications for funding every year than we can fulfill. And the other, which Emily noted, is that we're not asking enough from cities and towns sort of in exchange for that money, and we could be asking them to implement resilience policies at the local level as well, similar to what we do with green communities, where if you pass sort of clean energy and efficiency policies locally, you get funding for those kinds of projects. So what the bill does is it says if you pass, I think it's 4 of these policies from a menu of options that includes, a tree retention policy, a floodplain overlay district, setting up emergency resilience hubs when there's a kind of climate emergency, stormwater utility, I'm forgetting some of them. And then also if you adopt a stretch resilience code, then you'll become an MVP plus community. And in exchange for that, you'll get access to a guaranteed annual stream of funding to implement resilience projects. So that could be, green stormwater infrastructure to help prevent flooding. It could be, things like that Emily is working on in Newton to prevent flooding along Cheesecake Brook. So I think Senator Cream's really excited about that. And I feel like I'm saying that everything is something that might go into the environmental bond bill, but that's something that also could go into an environmental bond bill.
So that involves incentives, which is great, incentivizing communities to make changes.
Exactly.
It's really awesome. We're going to have to wrap up in a minute. There are some general thoughts, how can Massachusetts buck the federal onslaught? And I think that we've been talking about that in a way, but I don't know if there are any specific things, but certainly it seems like the march goes on locally. But I wonder if there are any other thoughts about how a state can buck the federal onslaught.
Just keep going. Yeah. Use all the money that they don't want you to use. That's still out there. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
All right. I think it makes sense to wrap up. I want to thank everybody for coming here. Thank our speakers. This has been really very informative. And I just want to remind everybody as they're leaving that there are 2 petitions that are on the tables outside. One is regarding the warrant article for plastic reduction in our community of Brookline. The other one is making polluters pay. So we would love your signatures for those. And thank you again for coming.
And we'll see you Friday at the bandstand.
yes.
On the Boston Common.
Yeah, Friday at noon, show up at the bandstand on the Boston Common. It's your opportunity to protest what's happening. Bring signs.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.